We're about to start, and you know from your program that this is the presentation by the rapporteurs to the plenary. So we will be very much pressed for time, so I don't want to say a lot. So I'm going to pass over to Mr. Clarence Nielsen, who will give us some of the points from the working group focusing on climate change. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We were in working group 2A dealing with the issue of children's rights and climate change. We have broken down our report into section 1 would be some observations, some key observations, and the second part of the report from our group will be recommendations, which are of a more specific nature. I must say generally the group that we had was a very big group. There were a lot of people that were very interested in the subject of the working group, which illustrates its importance and significance. And we had a wide range of people. We had a diversity of views that were expressed in our working group. And we have tried to capture those in our observations and in our recommendations. As the Chairman has said, time is short, so I will go directly to our key observations, which you will see behind me on the screen here. Running through them very quickly. Children are disproportionately affected by climate change, particularly the most vulnerable. Secondly, children's rights are often overlooked, as we all know, in national and international policies, and climate change is something frequently omitted from child-related policies. Thirdly, the Paris Agreement, which recognizes child rights and intergenerational equity, something that presents opportunities that can be built on and explored further. The fourth observation, the SDG and Sendai framework provides guidance for states and indeed the committee. It prioritizes the SDGs, and we specifically had reference to SDG 13B, which addresses youth capacity building in the context of climate change. Some further observations: lack of information and disaggregated data on children, especially those most at risk. A lack of mechanism to support children's meaningful participation and decision-making in climate change dialogue. And children and youth, of course, have very strong views on climate change. We had two young ladies present in our group, and they gave some very clear and firm viewpoints on various issues in climate change. The CRC does not specifically address climate change, but the committee has clarified states' obligations extend to protecting child's rights from the impacts of climate change. Those were our general observations. In terms of recommendations, we broke those down into four areas. The first area concerned children as agents of change. Points noted included utilizing children's creativity and experience, establishing child platforms. Things like child councils are used in some jurisdictions for environmental issues and peer sharing and learning, using digital technology to connect, providing for climate change education in school curricula, ensuring information is accessible and child-friendly, including for marginalized children, non-formal educational tools and activities, including traditional knowledge, something that can be usefully used. Subtopic topic 2, we focused on a number of recommendations to states. And these include placing children's rights at the center of national and international programs and taking the best interests of the child into account. Some subheadings in this general heading includes mainstreaming child-specific and child-sensitive reduction strategies, strengthening the social safety nets and social protection frameworks, again the issue of disaggregated data, ensuring children are fully involved in the policy dialogue, increasing their awareness and preparedness for climate change, particularly when natural disasters occur, investing in clean energy and eliminating subsidies on fossil fuels. Some further recommendations included seeking international cooperation to implement these recommendations, linking General Comment 19 on public spending to climate change, recognizing and supporting the importance of breastfeeding in this area. A further subtopic, we broke down recommendations into the role of the committee. And here the group recommends addressing mitigation in COBs, our concluding observations, particularly in relation to air pollution and fossil fuel investments, and calling on NGOs and states to address climate change in their reports to the committee, incorporating a standalone section on child rights and environment in the committee's COBs, concluding observations, a reference also to the Paris Agreement and its explicit reference to child rights and the Sendai framework, engaging with UNICEF and other UN mechanisms to integrate child rights in climate action. There was a recommendation to clarify the extent of states' obligations in relation to the environment and climate change, particularly pollution and access to clean energy, and emphasizing the responsibility of the private sector, the NGOs, in this regard. A further subtopic of recommendations was what we have grouped as general recommendations. And this relates to collecting disaggregated data and examples of best practice, taking a cross-sectoral approach to environmental issues, exploring legal remedies and options through the judicial process and the courts, and noting that NGOs and states should assist in collecting information regarding legal and policy frameworks, as well as examples of best practice. Greater interaction is recommended to be instituted between human rights and environmental experts, and bringing the committee's attention to relevant environmental case law. In summary, Mr. Chairman, those are the observations and recommendations that came out of a very useful and intense discussion in our working group on what was obviously a very important and popular area for us to examine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nielsen, for doing that on behalf of that working group. The next one that will report will be the one that Mr. Mahdi, also from the committee, served as a rapporteur for. It's on ecosystems and biodiversity.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We had a very interesting and constructive working group, and we had received several recommendations in this respect. The key observations that we prepared are also divided into three categories. The first one is the threats to natural resources, ecosystem, and biodiversity, and their impact on children's rights. Of course, the impact is known and it's wide with regard to health, life, survival, and developmental, play and leisure, and cultural activity. And play and leisure, I would like to also to refer to one of the interventions where it was stated the importance of connecting children to nature. This is a very important point in our view. Also, adequate standard of living, clean water, food, housing, education, cultural identity, and cultural identity is very important for those indigenous people, as an example. Freedom from violence, because sometimes the issue of biodiversity, degradation of biodiversity and ecosystem, it sometimes brings some violent action and reaction, whether by authorities against some communities with regard to eviction, for example, and other forms of violence. Information and participation. Information is very important also for children and their participation in this context. It's highly important that we have, in every and each state, we have to listen to children. please, next one. The basic elements of a child rights-based approach to the protection of the environment. Of course, respect for evolving capacity. When we talk about evolving capacity here, we mean capacities of children, different ages, which would need different friendly and sensitive information to address their way of thinking. Environmental education is one of the most important aspects also for children, as a matter of fact, for adults as well. Non-discrimination with regard to different children. We have a great array of categories in this respect. I don't want to name all of them, but I'm sure you all understand what we mean by non-discrimination. Basically, with regard to gender, for example, listening to both genders and others. Of course, inclusion and participation, again, of children. We are emphasizing this issue as one of the most important aspects. A third key observation, as you see, the next one, please. No, observation where I'll read it out from here. Yes, this is the one. It is not clear for us, and during our session, how children's rights are taken into consideration in legislations, policies, and practices related to biodiversity, natural resources, and ecosystem in particular on those issues. Maybe on other issues like climate change, maybe there are some consideration in legislation in this regard, and I think there were. And if we refer to several documents in this respect. But with regard particularly biodiversity, natural resources, and ecosystem, we could not identify precise legislation in this respect. Turning to the recommendation, and we have also divided the recommendation into three categories. The first one is, how can children be informed about the environment and participate in environmental decision-making? Awareness raising is very important, and of course linked also with education activities, including connecting children with nature. Again, this could be also a subject in the educational system of states, I hope. In some states and some schools will take children out of school into the nature and educate them what nature means and what they have to do in order to protect and preserve their nature. Age-sensitive information in the media. Media has to play a very important role in this respect in order to raise awareness. There are many children fora which should be including environmental issues. I mean, we have children in parliament, we have different children groups in educational system and in clubs and in many fields in this respect. Decision-making entities at all levels should ensure children's meaningful participation. How can children access protection measures and redress when harm has been caused? We have heard that in some states there is direct participation of children when they can compile a complaint, file a complaint against any violation of their rights with regard to environment. And of course, there is a role to be played by organizations in order to represent children's claims in this respect. We have also children commissioners and children's ombudsmen in many states, and they have to be mandated to receive complaints from children with regard to environment, whether it is biodiversity, ecosystem, or others. I would like to add here also the issue of our third optional protocol on communication procedures, where children or anyone on behalf of children can also submit complaints to us in the committee. This is a very important aspect, but it has to be preceded by a certain system of complaint receiving by children in the state party. State parties to the third option protocol, they are 29 now, and we hope that there will be some sort of awareness raising for those states to increase the number of their ratification. The second topic is the steps required to strengthen states and private sectors within the state CRC obligations and action on environmental protection. Of course, the starting point is for states to enforce, strictly enforce, the current legislation, as well as think of developing legislation for the protection of the environment, and ensure that public and private developmental projects respect children's rights and those projects are environmentally sound. Protection of environmental activities is also an obligation of states to do so. Strengthening the dialogue and cooperation between actors, all of them working on children's rights and the protection of the environment, of course, including children. We have some NGOs who are dealing with environmental issues, others who are dealing with children's rights. They have to cooperate. They have to combine their efforts and present the issue of children's rights and environment in general. So cooperation and collaboration in this respect is very important. The third subtopic is the role of the Committee on the Rights of the Child in holding governments accountable. The committee is dealing with these issues with every state party wherever it is appropriate and applicable. We will continue, and the committee should continue to recommend to state parties measures to protect the rights of the child in relation to the environment, and where appropriate, urge particular attention to indigenous children. And we want to highlight this issue of indigenous children, as well as also for displaced persons, including children. We have seen in some states, communities has been displaced for certain projects, for dams, for other projects like mining. We have heard some issues of mining in some states where resettlement was a problem and is still a problem. Continue to emphasize the state's obligation to regulate and monitor the private sector activities, domestically and overseas. It is a very important issue as well. And of course, encouraging the submission of information on environmental degradation and its impact on children's rights by all relevant actors. And I think my colleague has referred in the previous recommendation that we would like to receive information from NGOs, from other UN agencies as well on those issues, in order to provide us with the tools when we have our dialogue with the state parties. Thank you very much. I think I preceded my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mahdi, for doing that on behalf of that working group. Last but not least is the working group that focused on environmental toxicants, and I give to Ms. Kazova. You have the floor.
Yes. Thank you so much, Chair. I'm honored to summarize what was happening in the working group number 1. As Chair announced it, children's exposure to environmental toxicants. It was quite a challenging task for me, because I had to summarize what was happening during the whole day. So I ask you to take what I'm going to say with some level of flexibility, because I might miss something, definitely, and I promise we will very carefully study all the papers, all our notes, and make appropriate changes in our recommendations. So these are not final statements. So my first point is that environmental toxicants exposure directly affect enjoyment of children's rights. It actually affects the whole children's life, And as we all know, in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, all rights are indivisible, as well as generally human rights. But I highlighted here not that much articles, but issues where environmental toxicants are particularly crucial for children's life. First of all, it affects survival and development of children. There was quite a lot of discussion about that. It affects the ability of children to attain available standards of health, and of course affects their standards of living, access to good food, to not polluted water, to safe housing, and etc. And of course, it affects the child's ability to educate, as was pointed in one of the presentations. It affects the children's ability to go to school, because if a child is sick, he or she is not able to go to school and to study properly. But I would like to come back to the very first point about the child's right to survival and development. We had very many shocking figures, but I would just highlight 2 points. Of 20.6 million people who died as a result of living or working in an unhealthy environment in 2012, 26% of all deaths were children under 5. And another shocking number, according to WHO, around 600,000 children died from diseases which are linked to indoor and outdoor air pollution. And all these deaths are preventable. I'm very sorry to say that, but this is the fact. Next slide, please. What are the forms of exposure to environmental toxicants? As we know, and this was discussed during the whole day, these toxicants come from different sources. They come in different forms. It may be air pollution, it may be water pollution, it may be soil contaminations, and all this affects what we eat, how we live, what we drink, and accordingly how we feel and whether we are healthy or not. In the right corner, in the right part of the slide, you see the list of toxicants, but this is just very, very not exhaustive list, because actually, as also was mentioned in the presentation, currently there are about 1,400 toxicants, substances known that are damaging for children's health. Next slide, please. There were a lot of discussions on how children and why children are most vulnerable to environmental toxicants. We were reminded that children are not adults. Children are still in the process of developing physically and mentally. And environment toxicants affect their physical and mental development and may affect their future life and health when they become adults. Also, what is important and what was highlighted, that environmental toxicants affect reproductive health of would-be parents. So it means that actually children are born pre-polluted. They are already damaged by environmental toxicants. And in a sense, that the whole situation affects future generation, and system becomes more and more worse with each generation. And as was pointed out in one of the presentations, it is invisible threat and was called silent pandemic, what we actually face currently. And in this sense, we can speak about intergenerational impact of environmental toxicants. Next slide. There was discussion about challenges that we face in this regard, and they were divided into three kinds of challenges: prevention, those that relate to prevention, treatment, and redress. Those that relate to prevention, first of all, concern the fact that basically there is lack or definitely shortage of information, not only for children, but also for their parents and public at large. And there are two dimensions in this regard: lack of information and lack of access to information. We don't know whether this particular environmental toxicant is damaging or not, but we also are not able to find out whether it is so or not. There is certainly a lack of communication and collaboration across the sectors. This is what was highlighted in the previous group. You may see other challenges. I'm sorry I don't have time to go through all of them. It's of course important to have take into account that definitely there is lack of attention to children dimension when environmental laws and policies and programs are developed. Very briefly about treatment. This was highlighted by many speakers, that the problem is that many medical professionals do not know how to diagnose the diseases that are caused by environmental toxicants. They don't have adequate skills. They never have been trained in this regard to do that. So they misdiagnose when they face when they have children with particular problems. Redress, just one word, that there is lack of effective remedy mechanisms. And our recommendations are pretty extensive. I just will highlight that they concern, first of all, they are addressed to the states, they are addressed to NGOs, and they are addressed to agencies, and finally they are addressed to us, Committee on the Rights of the Child members. Do I still have 1 minute or no? Yes? Okay. So, recommendation to the states. First of all, I would like to remind that, so we should remind the states, first of all we do that all the time, but still, about the best interests of the child, which is absolutely key consideration, whatever the state does, whether it's laws, policies, and etc. And it should be always a primary consideration. And what was also important, and it was highlighted in many presentations, that change is possible. There should be just political will to make these changes. And first of all, states should develop, if they don't have adequate laws or on protection of children from environmental toxicants, if they don't have these laws, they should make them. In particular, it is very important, and it was also the topic in the group number 2, that there should be, of course, cooperation with business sector, and business sector should be accountable for what it is doing. Definitely, it is absolutely crucial to have child rights approach in all laws and policies. Currently, it is, I think I don't exaggerate, it is almost absent. It is important to enhance intersectoral cooperation, but I would highlight that this cooperation should be a good cooperation and not a bad cooperation. We had an example when in one of the countries, as a result of cooperation, it was decided to get rid of Ministry of Environment and instead to create Ministry of Mines and Ministry of Economics that was supposed to deal with all these issues. So it should be good cooperation. I would like to stress it. Absolute lack of data, and states, first of all, should collect data, of course, in order to ensure proper regulation. Of course, child participation, there were lots of talks about it. It should be ensured as well. No need to speak that laws should be enforced. It's a problem, but we all understand that. And there are some other recommendations. You may read it, but I would just like to go to NGOs part. It is necessary to facilitate collaboration among NGOs working in different sectors, including in children's rights, environment, and health. They should all cooperate with each other. Also, it is very important to provide information on environmental pollution and children's rights to the Committee on the Rights of the Child. NGOs and all those who work in this area, you are our main source of information. It's necessary to engage with UN actors, and as to UN agencies, no, basically you see what are the recommendations. It's necessary to mainstream children's rights in the policies and technical assistance through the UN system as a whole. And there is a set of, next one, and there is a set of recommendations that are addressed to ourselves, and we will definitely take it on board. One of them concerns, for instance, general comment on child rights and environmental pollution. We will discuss it. We cannot promise you at that stage, but we definitely will look into it. But there was quite strong voices in favor of such general comment. And so I think my time is up. I hope you managed to read it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kazova. We understand you had much longer to cover, so thank you for that. On the program, we have concluding comments by Ms. Sandberg, here on my right. So you have the floor.
Thank you. It's an honor and a really great pleasure for me to make some concluding remarks on behalf of the working group. I have chaired the working group for this day of general discussion, and we've worked on this for a whole year. We've had a lot of expectations for this day, and what we wanted to do was to bring together the children's rights discourse with the environmental discourse. And I think it has been a great success, thanks to all of you that have been here today. We've really managed to discuss environmental issues in the light of children's rights and children's rights in the light of environmental issues. So it's been, I think it's been so interesting and really quite moving to be here today and to listen to all the strong statements that people have made. Particularly, I must say that I've been so impressed by the knowledge, commitment, and passion, as somebody mentioned, of the young people who've been here today and who have been speaking to us. I think it's really promising for the future that we have such strong young people to deal with these issues. In the environmental discourse, there's a lot of talk about future generations, and it's a kind of abstract concept. But the children are already here. The children are the future generations, as John Knox said to me earlier today. So we don't need to wait for the future generations. We can listen to the children who are here today, and we need to take care of their rights today. I would like to thank very, very warmly and heartily felt Terre des Hommes for having proposed this day of general discussion and also for having taken the responsibility for organizing it. And particularly, I would like to mention Jonas Schubert, who's here on the first row. He's just been wonderful. I think for him it started out as kind of part-time, then it became full-time, then it became day and night for the last few weeks. I would also like to thank our consultant, Lisa Myers, who's worked behind stage for a couple of months. It's also been really great work done by Lisa. And also, and not least, the secretary, or she's been the OHCHR representative. I don't know if she wants to be called secretary, but she's the staff of the OHCHR, Nina Sluga, who's always been there on the dot and answering emails. And And then to the follow-up of this day of general discussion, we can't just let it be with this. We are going to make our recommendations, put them even more into style and order, and maybe add a few more details, I think. We'll continue to discuss this. I mean, they will be put on the website. There will be a proper report from this day of general discussion. But I think it's been so interesting also to see all of the various initiatives that happen around the world. There's so much going on, and my dream would be that we could keep connected, and that we should make a global movement for children's rights and the environment, if we could all stay in touch somehow. So thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we also thank Kristen Sandberg for being the chairperson for that working group, please? Thank you very much. On the point of success, we can definitely say that the day has been successful. I had few minutes earlier, and I went online and tried to check the definition of success, and it says noun, the favorable termination of attempts or endeavors. That's what it says. So as far as the day is concerned, I think we can fairly say that we've been successful. But the success of the team and how it helps to bring about the lived reality of children on the ground does not really depend on the conversations that we have here. It doesn't depend only on the debates or the length of the debate. We could have had this day maybe for a couple more days, but there is no glory in the size of the amount of time that we spend on this. Or pronouncements. I think, in fact, it doesn't largely depend on what we do in this room as much as what we do actually outside of this room. And my colleague here on the right has already mentioned about the need to actually keep in touch, how we build the momentum towards this, how we try to clarify the obligations that states have, the various stakeholders in terms of UN agencies, civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, and of course, one cannot forget the role that the children actually play in trying to realize the rights that are associated with the issues that we talked about today. Partnerships are definitely critical. We had a good anticipation in terms of numbers. That's actually what happened here today. We had, I understand, about 240 registrations. but also about 50 submissions, which is actually very critical and solid. So what will make this make or break, or successful or otherwise, obviously depends on what we manage to do with the information that we've actually gathered, what we manage to do with the partnerships that we have already built or continue to build. So I, as chairperson, see this as the beginning of the beginning. And I'm sure that the committee members would agree with me. It depends on how focused we are, systemic, resilient, and of course, evidence-driven. So with those very brief remarks, I just want to say thank you very much to everybody who have actually made this day successful, but also who will continue to make a success out of the team that we have actually started to have a conversation on today as we move out of this room. Housekeeping issues. We have a reception to launch the exhibition, which I understand is happening downstairs close to gate or door 40. Third Zone has kindly organized a reception for the participants of the day of the general discussion on the ground floor, and it will officially launch the exhibition. And I am informed both the exhibition but also the reception is done with the generous support of the permanent mission of Germany here in Geneva. So we're very grateful to the support that has been provided by them. And of course, I officially close this meeting closed. And thank you very much to all the participants, to all the colleagues who actually took part, to the interpreters, to the priest writers, and everybody who've been able to contribute in one way or another to make sure that this day has been successful. Thank you very much, and hopefully we see most of you downstairs, hopefully all of you downstairs at the reception. Thank you.